Tell a story, make a point. That's some of the best speaking advice you can ever receive. But why are stories so important? What is it a story is supposed to accomplish? How do we tell a story for maximum impact? These are all questions long-term Toastmaster David Otey is going to be answering at the upcoming D26 annual conference. David's been a Toastmaster for a long time. He's been a professional speaker for over 10 years. He's the author of 3 books. He's a co-author of 2 more. And David, I got him to share some of his time with us this morning to give us some ideas, to give us an introduction to his upcoming workshop, which is going to be called Crafting Connection. And I guess we can start right there, David. What is it about connection? What do you mean specifically by connection? And why is it so important for speakers?
Well, that's a great place to start. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about this because I love talking about stories and connection. You know, I've been in Toastmasters since, I want to say 2005. And I've been speaking professionally, as you said, for over 10 years. I've had a chance to learn from some of the best in the business. This is not stuff I've made up. I've learned from people like Craig Valentine and Darren LaCroix and Ed Tate and others who have held the title World Champion of Public Speaking. And what I've learned is that there are 3 things that are more important than anything else when it comes to speaking. And those 3 things are connection, connection, and connection. It's just like in real estate, right? Location, location, location. If you don't connect with your audience, your information goes nowhere. I present to and coach a lot of technical speakers. That's kind of my specialty. I've become known as the go-to person for helping scientists and engineers, and financial professionals, and other people who give information-heavy presentations, helping them to learn how to tell the story of their work, because story is the most basic unit of human interaction. Think about it. We know who we are because of our stories. You know, we are the people of our stories. That's why the way history is taught is so important. And that's why some people are challenging some of the conventional wisdom about our stories of who we are. Mm-hmm. Story is the most basic unit of human interaction, dating back to when, you know, the earliest proto-humans sat around a campfire and told a story of what happened when they were last hunting down dinner. And others learned from those stories. They didn't have to keep repeating the same mistakes. That's how important story is. In fact, there's a lot of interesting science about how our brains are wired for story. Just to give you one example, there's a researcher at Harvard, or he was at Harvard at the time, named Paul Zak, Z-A-K, who did a lot of work on expression of a neurotransmitter called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is familiar to a lot of people. It's often called the bonding hormone or even the love hormone because it's what prompts feelings of empathy for someone. Have you ever heard of oxytocin?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, what Paul Zak was able to show experimentally is that not only is oxytocin expressed in some of the ways that are familiar to us, like caressing a lover or even petting your dog,
Right.
but oxytocin is also expressed when you experience a story.
Wow.
So when a speaker uses a story, that speaker is changing their listeners' brain chemistry temporarily and legally, even if you're not in Colorado, because they're chemically creating a situation where that listener can have empathy for the speaker. So stories are so important. Stories are what make your content understandable and memorable. And if people don't understand your content and they don't remember it or remember what you want them to do about it after they've heard you speak, then what good was it?
Right. They've forgotten you. I have heard a bit about oxytocin and storytelling, also dopamine and serotonin. I don't have the chops
That's right.
to get into it, but it's
Sure.
an interesting point that you can tell someone a good story and you're going to affect their neurochemistry. Like you said, temporarily, and you're not necessarily going to change their life entirely, but that can be the first step in it. a more positive moment now can lead to a positive series of moments today, tomorrow, and into the future. And that's a very powerful thing. And
It
a very
is.
powerful thing. It's interesting. You also mentioned talking to very technically oriented people. I come from IT, and it seems to me that's one of the struggles we have. We incredibly smart people that are incredibly technically gifted, but a lot of them just struggle with connecting. And a piece of it is it's ones and zeros, facts. Here's this data point, this data point, and it makes it a struggle. And the thing is, I think if I were in a position to encourage these people this direction, they could be working more in the framework of a story if they were just thinking that way, because there's always a story. When the computer, when the mainframe, which I work on, went sideways, there was somebody there. They had to react in a certain way. It was either an ideal reaction or it was a less than ideal reaction. All that's a story. Then what happened? How did we have to repair it? Or how did it go well because of, the ideal reaction? That's all a story. What are we doing? How are we going to teach people going forward so we can learn from this incident? Also all a story. And it's very easy to do that. And some people do it instinctively when they're not thinking about it. It seems to me these very technical people struggle to just, when you say you got to make stories, that there's that struggle. They may do it naturally in lots of areas, but then when they want to break down how I deliver this very technical information with stories or in the framework of a story, it seems like there's a struggle there. Have you run into that as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's always a story there. I like to say wherever desire meets obstacle, there's a story. If you desired to get that mainframe running again, and there was some obstacle, some problem you had to solve before that computer would do what you wanted it to do, there's a story there. There's absolutely a story there. And as you say, some people go to story instinctively.
Mm-hmm.
But the great news here is that it can all be learned. Even if you're not instinctively someone who goes to a story when you prefer to go to just cut and dried information, it can be learned. These techniques can be learned and taught. I was in broadcast engineering for 25 years. See, I have a technical background too. I think that's one reason why I gravitate toward scientists and engineers. I've got a degree in physics, and the thing is, so many, we'll take scientists, for example. They're trained to find the story in their data.
Right.
But then when they go to share something with an audience, they share the data and the conclusion. What about the story? How did you get from point A to point B? Anytime desire meets obstacle, there's a story. Okay, so you desired to know something. You desired to solve a problem or explain an observation, and the existing body of knowledge didn't offer you that answer. There was some limitation on human knowledge before you expanded it with your scientific work, or before you came up with a new engineering solution. There's a story there. What drove you and what obstacle did you have to overcome? And in technical presentations, people don't want to talk about their obstacles. They just want to go straight to the conclusion. Well, that conclusion will mean so much more to your audience when they see just a glimpse. It can be no more than 3 sentences sometimes, just a glimpse into the struggle you had to go through, the obstacle that you had to overcome in an innovative way to get to that conclusion or that result. So even in a very information-heavy presentation, there's always room for story, and that's where you'll connect with your audience. I like to say, and I think I did already say this, but it bears repeating, your information goes nowhere without connection.
That's interesting that it seems like you said a lot of people want to rush to the cool part, right? Well, this is the part where it gets good, but the part where it's struggle, where it's a challenge. I mean, actually, a lot of that's the good part as well, but it makes that part so much more impactful. I mean, if we just hear the end of the movie, how, Bond is doing great and he's reinstated and, everything like that, or how whoever the hero is, won the day and is now successful, without the story of how he got there, the story of how things went from a more or less day-to-day existence for him to this great adventure of ups and downs, it has virtually no impact. It's of very little interest. And when you get that, when you add that into your story, and you gave a great formula for it, that's great. Any Toastmaster should be writing that down. When desire meets obstacle. because you can see that in any number of different places in your life, every moment of the day. As simple as, I want to make my point better, I'm not making it as well as I want to. Desire meets obstacle. I can have that happening right now, but how we got onto the call, what I was doing this morning, what I'll be doing later today, desire meeting obstacle is going to be coming up constantly. And if you have that lens through which to see things, you'll be able to grab plenty of stories for your speeches, presentations, sales presentations, whatever you'd like to do with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There, excuse me, there's always a story there. And for people to come to my workshop, and we should talk about that a little bit, you'll get that a little elaboration on that basic formula. It's actually a 3-part formula that you're going to pick up at the workshop, and you'll have a chance to explore this concept of who wants something and what's the obstacle to them getting that initially. That's the basic setup. Then you can go a lot further in terms of escalating the conflict before it's resolved. But even in a fairly short workshop, as we're going to have about 50 minutes, and I want people to have a chance to actually craft a story, a very short story, or the beginning of one anyway, using this formula that you're going to pick up. And then you'll workshop it with a small group of people, and then we'll get some volunteers up on the stage to actually give their story and get some real-time coaching on it, and there may even be a prize in it. So that's the way the program is going to go. It's not just going to be a lecture on story. It's going to be an interactive workshop where people have a chance to try their hand at using a formula you're going to pick up. Because even if it sounds formulaic to say there is a formula, people have been breaking down literature into formulas since the time of the ancient Greeks.
Right.
You mentioned a minute ago, James Bond. I mean, you can go through this whole hero's journey. That's a familiar formula that some people have heard of, right? With many steps. And we're not going to get that elaborate in this workshop, but after you come to this workshop, you will be able to do a better job of getting and holding your audience's attention, moving them from where they start out to where you want them to be, so that they'll take the exact next step you want them to take.
Very nice. Very nice. That's, again, very interesting that there's a formula, and it's interesting to me, the notion of formulas. And some people get upset about that. So, well, I don't want it to be formulaic. I don't want it to be canned. But it's like anything, literature, movies, they have certain ideas that get repeated over and over again. Plot, rising action, character development, things like that. You could say that's a formula, but you can express that formula in immeasurable different ways. And if you've got something simple you can refer to, I mean, sometimes some people are natural storytellers. Some people, once they just start looking, they'll start seeing them everywhere, and they could just use those at any point. But if you don't have that, or if you're feeling like writer's block or something, you're just feeling stuck, having that formula gives you like, okay, well, what's first step? If it, desire meets obstacle, where do I want something and I'm not getting it? Or where's my ideal customer want something they're not getting? Or where's my audience? Whoever it is, if you've got that little piece there, that just gives you a framework through which to apply your mind to the problem. And you can see all the, if we were saying something very broadly done many times, weight loss, what are the obstacles there, whether it's a lack of motivation to exercise, or not knowing the proper exercises, or being too addicted to sweets, or whatever else it is. These are all obstacles. How do we overcome those obstacles? Well, there's ways diets have done it before. There's new ways that it can be done, and there's different problems that you can look at if you look at it closely enough. And those are oftentimes the breakthrough people, the people that look at the same problem and see a different way of solving it, or see a new layer of it that people haven't been addressing, and they address that. And that's, again, all done through story. If you tell your audience a better story, a more impactful story, you can't help but impact them more than what they've been getting thus far. So there's a great power to that, even if it's formulaic, as you said.
Well, a recipe is a formula, right?
It is.
A recipe is a formula. Think about baking a cake. Okay. Most cakes, unless they're, particularly unusual cakes made without flour or leavening or something like that. There's a subset of things we still call cake that are made quite differently. But most cakes, you've got a formula that consists of a certain amount of flour, sugar, milk, eggs, baking powder, maybe chocolate. And yet that doesn't mean every cake is the same by any means.
Right.
You know, it's the way you combine those ingredients and then the way you top it off with your frosting and your decoration that's going to set your cake apart from someone else's. So just because there is a formula and one person may make a different variation on it than you do, that doesn't mean that the formula renders that cake bland or inedible. It's what
Right.
you put into it. It's what you put into it. So I have a simple formula that I picked up from a story workshop by Ed Tate a number of years ago. I like to give credit where it's due. It's called the ABC formula.
Okay.
And if you want to hear more, you're gonna have to come to the workshop. But you're gonna use and pick up the ABC formula, and we may even go beyond that a little bit, depending on the time and the number of participants we have. Because Craig Valentine, who I've spent a lot of time learning from, has a more elaborate story formula, and we may start adding some of his elements in as well. You know, this is the great thing about Toastmasters, and the reason I stay in it is there's just so many opportunities to learn from people. Yeah, you know, when you come to the District 26 annual conference, you're going to get to hear on Saturday morning a presentation by Carl Mecklenburg, who I had the good fortune to know through another organization. And after his keynote, he's going to offer a workshop where he breaks down that keynote and shows you the different elements that make it effective. And some of those elements, of course, will be story. So then following that workshop, you'll be able to come to my workshop called Crafting Connection, and we're going to drill down on just what it is a story, a well-told story is supposed to do for you, and how you find stories. I have a book. You mentioned that I've authored some books. The first book that I sat down and wrote by myself, I decided just to ask myself the question, what are people mostly coming to me to ask about? And at the time, it was about telling stories. So I have a book called The Speaker's Quick Guide to Telling Better Stories. And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of something from chapter 1, because you were talking about finding the story in, you know, an IT situation or something like that.
Right.
So right here in chapter 1, under the subheading Information Doesn't Sell Itself, I've got a series of 8 different questions that you can ask to find the story, even about a technical presentation. I'll just share a few of them. Let's say that you are one of these people who says to me, well, David, I don't have a story, but I have information. It's compelling information. It needs to be delivered. My response to that is always, it's compelling to you. If you want to make it compelling to someone else, you've got to wrap that information in a story. So here are some questions you can ask to find the story. What did this compelling information mean to you when you first learned it? What need drove you to discover this information? And what makes it so compelling that it must be shared? Those are just some examples of the questions you can ask, even about something that is seemingly a very dry or technical topic, in order to uncover the story that will connect that information to your audience's experience.
That's interesting. What did you say the title of your book was?
It's called The Speaker's Quick Guide to Telling Better Stories. It's volume 1 in the Speaker's Quick Guide series.
And people can get those on Amazon or where?
Yes, you can find that on Amazon. In fact, if you want, I can give you a link that you can put in the show notes that will take people to a page with all 3 of those books. I'll probably also have some at the conference, but I'm not there primarily to sell books. I'm there primarily to help people tell stories.
Nice, nice. Very good stuff. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the conference, about story?
Well, we've been sharing information,
Mm-hmm.
but we haven't told a story, have we?
Not yet.
We committed the first mistake that people make when giving a presentation is they don't start with a story. Years ago when I was in broadcast engineering, I had an opportunity to present a paper at the National Broadcast Engineering Conference. Now, at the time, I was chief engineer of a TV station in Austin, Texas. And the conference was in Houston, a reasonable drive away. So it was a relatively easy thing for me to do to attend this conference. I got approval from my employer, and they said, sure, go do it. So I got in my car, I drove to Houston. I remember the first time I saw the George R. Brown Convention Center on the edge of downtown Houston. I always thought, I still think to this day, it looks kind of like a beached steamboat. I walked into a ballroom that had been subdivided. It was still a big boxy room. And I was all excited because I was going to present my very first technical presentation to a technical audience. I had done well in speech class in high school, and I thought, I've got this. I know how to do this, right? But I'd never delivered a paper before. And I knew better than to think I'm just going to go in and read the paper. So I picked some highlights from the paper. I put them on slides to put up on the screen. And then I started basically doing what so many people do when they give a presentation. I was just narrating the slides. I looked out over the room. It was a dimly lit room. There were probably 20 people in those 200 seats. The brightest thing in the room was not me. It was the projection screen. It was probably 2:00 in the afternoon in this dimly lit room. So you can see where this is going, right? Food coma is setting in from lunch, and pretty soon I hear snoring. Put that audience to sleep. I really did. And it was such a disappointing experience for me because I knew something was missing, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't yet know. I hadn't yet been taught the importance of giving a story. So I drove back to Austin all disappointed. Well, fast forward a decade or more from that. And I was asked through the work I'd been doing in broadcast engineering to moderate an industry-wide summit meeting about the rollout of this new technology that was going to change the way TV news photographers gathered news. And so it was such a big industry-wide change that a lot of people were nervous about it. And the decision was made that we've got to have a good training program to support the rollout of this technology. Well, because of my role in moderating this summit meeting, I was asked then to step in as the subject matter expert on that technology for the company that was going to provide the training. And then some unexpected things happened, and I ended up running the program, which was not what I thought that was on my bingo card. I didn't think I was going to be running the program, but there it was. I ended up running it. I had to learn a lot about becoming a trainer and running a training program. And the first time we rolled out that training program, it was not well received because it was so information heavy. It had been put together by a bunch of engineers, and we thought the problem we needed to solve was lack of information. Well, that's not the problem we needed to solve. I went back and I asked some people in the industry. I said, well, what do you think about the rollout of this new technology? And these were people who would actually be using the new technology when it came out. And they said things like, I'm afraid I'm going to get yelled at. I'm afraid I'm going to get fired because the new technology wouldn't work the way they were used to. That phrase, I'm afraid, that stuck with me. And the thing I realized was the problem we needed to solve was not lack of information. The problem we needed to solve was fear.
Right.
Now imagine walking into a room of people and saying, okay, I'm here to take away your fear. Think how well that would go, right?
What drugs do you say
that? But we went back and we redesigned the training program. And how do we redesign it? We redesigned it around story.
Nice.
A quick visual story, a 2-minute video montage of some people doing your job with the technology you're using now. Now, here's a story, another little video montage of another group of people at a station that already used the new technology, doing the same job, but in a slightly different way using the new technology. 2 stories, and we put them up side by side. And we said, okay, what's different? What's the same? And from there, the conversation just flowed. Because now we're not talking about something abstract like a technology. We're talking about a story of how you do your work. And that's what saved us. And that's what helped me from continuing to go around boring people with technical papers. It's all about the story. And it's all about the ability to learn to tell a better story. If you think you're already a storyteller, come to this workshop. If you think you're not a storyteller, come to this workshop.
Benefit
in,
either way.
in 2009, I had the privilege of meeting Craig Valentine for the first time. It was that was the last year that Toastmasters did regional conventions for the next to the last level of the International Speech Contest. And I was representing my district, not District 26, but another one at the time. I had won the district competition. I was at the regional convention, and the keynote speaker was going to be Craig Valentine, and he was going to offer a workshop on storytelling. And I thought, well, I'm the district such and such international speech contest champion. I obviously know a thing or two about telling stories. I'm a speaker in 3 states. Oh my God, I was blown away. I went to hear Craig, and that was when I began to realize how much I didn't know, how much I yet had to learn about telling stories. And I've been on that journey ever since. And when people come to this workshop, they'll have a chance to share part of that journey with me. So I hope we'll see people there April 29th, Saturday up in Breckenridge. My workshop will start at 11 a.m.
That's a really important point you made. That people have to keep coming back, because it's very easy to, anything you've gotten any skill level with, that you've gotten to some ability, you've achieved some goals in. There's a certain power to that, and some people are happy with where they're at, but how much more you can get, how much better you can get. I mean, there's the people that are the best in any field that I've ever met are the people that are aware of how little they know, in spite of how much they know compared to most of the people in the field or most of the average folks out there.
Very well put.
Still aware that they are beginners in some sense, that they've scratched the surface of what's available here. And that's definitely true of speaking in general, definitely true of storytelling specifically. But I'm looking forward to the conference that's coming up. That's going to be the 28th and the 29th. Your presentation is on Saturday, I believe, right after
Yes.
Carl Mecklenburg.
That's right. Right after Carl Mecklenburg, my workshop will start at 11 a.m. on Saturday the 29th.
Right on. And we'll go ahead and put a link in the description for anybody that wants to check out your books. David, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, it's been a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.